In this video, I'm going to try and provide you with a few things you can do, few examples of repairs you can do if the damage to siding is larger than a foot, or in some cases could be 2 foot from the bottom. And if you just have it where it's only 5 or 6 inches, you could always slap something over it or cut out some of the damage, replace it, and then put a 2x12, 2x10, 1x8, something like that on the bottom to cover it up. That's a common repair. But what do you do if it's a little higher up? For example, 18 inches, you have a lot of damage somehow in this area. The first thing you will need to do will be to cut a section of the siding out, depending upon where you want to install the new band. And again, we'll get into that in a few moments. But you will need to remove the damaged siding. And to do this, you might actually cut into the paper the protective water-resistant barrier. And if that's the case, you're going to need to install some new paper or seal it somehow. And the best thing I could think of is if you did cut all the way across, you simply just install some new paper, slide it under the old paper. It's not going to go over. Remember, the water drains down. Any water that gets behind the siding needs to be able to drain onto the front of the lower sheet of building paper or moisture resistant barrier, whatever you're going to use. And then in this case, you can simply install a new piece of T111 or whatever type of siding you are going to use. And a lot of times if you're using vertical siding that goes from the bottom to the top, T111 plywood siding, you're going to need to have a piece of Z-bar. And the Z-bar is going to allow any water that rolls down the face of the siding to actually roll over the metal. And then, of course, you can see here where it's going to roll down here and then over this, and this is usually going to be 3/8 to a 1/2 inch, something like that. Plenty of room to where it's going to drop off and continue down. If you don't have the siding in here, let's go back to the scene here. If you don't have the siding, and again, you can shove this tight, you can put caulking in it, you can do whatever you want in hopes of never having a problem, and you might not. I have seen plenty of people, I've even done it myself, we just put some caulking in on the top of the T111 and then shove it up tight, and then whatever squishes out, we wipe off, and we're good to go. But don't forget, sometimes siding or the caulking, the siding will expand and contract, causing the caulking to crack or break or provide a gap, and that's when you're going to run into a problem. So you're always going to be better off, in my opinion, having a piece of Z-bar here to where any water that does roll off. Now, I also don't recommend caulking the bottom. I see this all the time. The Z-bar is meant to allow the water. You're going to have some water maybe that sets on top here. And if you live in an area, you might even think about raising the plywood, leaving a gap of at least 1/8 of an inch minimum between the top of the Z-bar and the bottom of the plywood siding or whatever vertical siding you're using, so that any water that does end up sitting in here, because that will happen every once in a while, you're going to have water that comes down and rolls right back and accumulates here. And if you have enough water, eventually it's going to absorb into the bottom of the siding and cause it to expand or delaminate. I've seen that a lot. So keep that in mind. Now, here's another thing you can do. You can get a longer piece of Z-bar and install some type of a wood trim. This could be a 1x, something like a 1x6, a 1x4, a 1x3. Could be a 2x2, 2x3, something like that. I'm going to leave that up to you. Remember, these are just examples. And of course, here you can see the same method. Any water that rolls off the face is either going to roll back and then dry out eventually, or roll off and down. So you can take, with this, if you're looking for, and this can be used to break up the different siding. So let's say that you have a siding up here that you can't buy anymore, or it's too expensive. You know, something that's redwood and you don't want to, you know, take the whole house apart. You can always use something like this to break up the two different types of siding. So you could always have shingle siding down here. You could have lap siding down here, siding that runs from right to left. You could put a different type of siding down here and use this to separate it. Now, there is another thing you can do. Always nail another piece of trim, and this sometimes gives it a neat look. So you can use this particular method with a variety of different types of damage. If you only have 12 inches of damage, you could always lower this upper band. You could lower it. If you have damage that's a little higher, or the siding's not really looking good, or you want a different type of look, you could always raise this up. So you could space these boards 4 inches apart, 10 inches apart. You could space them 4 foot apart, just to give you an idea. This particular method, along with the next one I'm going to show you, you can use it. You put this in a variety of different locations to deal with the amount of damage that you have, or the particular design, architectural design or detail that you're looking for. Let's take a look at another architectural design or siding trim. This particular design here has a sloping trim. And we refer to these, I'm pretty sure, as a water table. Don't ask me why. This metal, you might go look for it. And if you can't find it, you might want to ask if they have any metal, water table metal. This might be an angled metal, so keep that in mind. Might be helpful for you. This particular design here, you can put the siding below and run the trim up to it. And then, of course, take and slope the bottom trim to give you a little more nailing on here. So you can, if you use these two boards together, and you can always nail these two boards together and then nail it to the wall. You know, if you're going to have some metal like this and you want to hide your nails, just take and drive the nails, nail it together first, and then when you slide it in, you'll just nail this board to the wall, and then you're not going to see any nails here. Give you a nice finished area, or a nice area to finish. So now, one more thing you're going to need if you do something like this is a drip cut. This allows any water that rolls down off of the trim and down off of the side, it eliminates the possibility that it will roll back all the way up, and this happens a lot. So the farthest it's going to roll is to up here and then drip down. But if this isn't here, I've actually seen problems, repaired the damage of the water, and it's rolled all the way back up. So don't be confused. Now, obviously, I don't want to say obviously, if you have something sloping 45 degrees, a 45-degree angle, you're probably not going to have that problem. Most of the time, this particular trim setup is 10 degrees. So I would say anywhere between 10 and 7 degrees, you would be fine for something like this. Or we could even say between 12 and 7 degrees, maybe. 10 degrees is a real common slope for something like this. Here's another example you can use if you're looking for if you want to use some smaller metal, for example. You can always have the upper water table or trim run all the way to the wood framing. And what this does is, instead of having an area here where the wood trim butts up against the plywood, it gives you a little more room, a little more insurance for the water that rolls off of the front of the siding and then down off of the metal to prevent it from rolling back up here. Now remember, if you're using a piece of flat trim, the metal is going to need to lap over the lip of the front of the trim. If it's sloping 10 degrees, you can use something like this, because the water is probably going to roll off. It's going to have a hard time working its way all the way back up. The recommended distance for me, and this isn't something that is written in stone, I don't know if you could find this information, I would like to see at least an inch here, maybe an inch and a half, but there is a problem that is often created if you have the metal extending out too far past the siding. I've seen it warp, and you'll actually have a gap be underneath the metal trim, and you'll have to go back in with a nail. So if you ever see that, you'll come up to something that looks like this. It's got some metal, and it's kind of wavy, you know. And it's got a bunch of nails in it. That's probably what it was. Someone went in and put a roofer's nail and just drove it into the flashing there to prevent the big gap there. And I've seen that a lot. So really, what some architects will do is they only want to see 1/4 of an inch here. And if that's the case, you're going to need to run the trim on the bottom as far back as you can to give you as much room. And the reason why they don't want too much metal sticking out past here is to prevent that the metal from warping. So this would be something you should consider when trying to figure out how long of the metal you're going to need. Now, don't forget, you can always put a piece of wood trim on the bottom, as shown in the previous examples, to give you a different look. Now, here's something that you might need, and that would be some blocks. Now, what type of blocks would be up to you, because you need to keep in mind that once you cut the siding, especially if it's plywood siding, you've just removed the shear value of the siding. It is no longer there. So you will need something to make the connection, to reconnect it. And a flat block like this probably isn't going to be enough. You might need to put a block like this. It might need to be a bigger block, or it might need to be a 4x6 or a 4x4. So this would be something an engineer would be able to help you with. Remember, the examples I have here are not going to work for everyone, but keep in mind that if you cut the siding and you're not going to have the shear strength, you're going to need to somehow connect the top or the bottom of the upper siding if it's plywood, or really if it's anything except for lap siding. I don't think this wouldn't apply to lap siding. It would only apply to vertical siding that goes from the bottom to the top, or plywood siding where you're using it to get some shear strength. Lap siding might provide you with some shear value, but if that's the case, something like this I don't think would matter structurally. But you are going to need to connect the top of the lower piece of siding to the bottom of the upper siding, and that could be done with a block. So one more thing I'd like to point out before we finish is that these methods are only examples. They're only meant to be examples and might not work for your particular situation. So just keep that in mind.